Good day, everyone. This is Ma'am Sai. Welcome to our STS class. And for today's session, we will discuss about Indigenous Knowledge System or IKS. I am going to share to you our screen that will serve as guide during our lecture. Okay, so let us begin our discussion for this session. Indigenous Knowledge System or IKS. We know that as human are gathering knowledge basically for two purposes. Number one, survival. Number two is for development. We try to understand and come to grasp with our environment in order for us to survive. During those ancient period until the pre-colonialism that occurred in our science and technology history. So this gathering of knowledge is in short a basis for all kinds of activities which aim to build a knowledge system. Okay, and it has become customary to refer this kind of knowledge as indigenous knowledge or traditional knowledge or local knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge, and ethnoecology. So those are the terms used referring to those ways of knowing how to survive and also ideas about meanings and purposes of those indigent or indigenous people. So now, long before the development of this modern science, indigenous people, okay, have developed their ways of knowing how to survive. Ito na nga yung sinasabi nating indigenous knowledge. They are using this in order to survive. And also the ideas about the meanings in their surroundings, the purposes of those, and values, of course. So they also took care of the natural landscape for thousands of years in our country. Say, for example, the Banawi rice terraces. Okay, so that is how indigenous people taken care of our natural landscape for thousands of years. And if we lose their wisdom, we lose the land as well. Okay, so as long as these native people, the indigenous people are not heard, okay, we will lose this kind of knowledge, especially in our country. That is why this lecture is very important to us to know about indigenous knowledge and how can we relate this to modern science, since we are talking about science, technology, and society. So in this session, we will clarify what is the indigenous and the indigenous knowledge and what are the basic differences between kinds of knowledge in the modern science, okay, we have today. Let us first define the term indigenous. So according to UN, indigenous is defined as group of people whose social, cultural, and economic conditions distinguish them from other sections of the national communities, and whose status is regulated wholly or partially by their own, take note po, their own customs or traditions or by special laws or regulations. So people in independent countries who are regarded as indigenous are considered as decent people who inhabited geographical region to which belongs at the time of colonization or the establishment of present state boundaries. So, kumbaga, naka-preserve pa din po yung tradition, yung custom na nag-govern on that specific group. Okay? So, considering that is actually a general definition, but considering the diversity of indigenous people, because we can find them all over the globe, an unofficial definition of indigenous has not been adopted by any UN system, but instead, the system has developed a modern understanding of this term based on the following criteria. So you have to take note of the following, since these are the following criteria, okay, in order to be knowledgeable about indigenous people, indigenous knowledge. So the following criteria includes historical continuity with pre-colonial and or pre-settler societies, strong link to territories and surrounding natural resources, distinct social, economic, or political system, distinct language, culture, and beliefs, form non-dominant group of society, and resolve to maintain and reproduce their ancestral environments and system as distinctive people and communities. So, in the Philippines, meron ba tayong indigenous people? Okay, so ito, in the CAR region, in the Cordillera Administrative Region, they have known for having a rich or vast coverage of indigenous knowledge system and practices, or IKSPs. It is composed of the 6 provinces of Apayao, Kalinga, Abra, Mountain Province, Ifugao, and Benguet, plus the chartered city of Baguio. So collectively, the people are popularly known as the Igorot, which are grouped into a number of ethnic or ethno-linguistic identities such as Apayao or Isneg, Tinggian, Kalinga, Bontok, Kankanae, Ibaloy, Ifugao, and Bago. So, ito po yung pinaka kilalang indigenous people in our country. Okay, they are found in the CAR region. So, now let's move on to the question. What is indigenous knowledge? How is it affects our society today? Let us first define the different definition of indigenous people, indigenous knowledge based from different literature. So it is understood as a local or traditional knowledge that indigenous people have brought down with them from earlier times via the oral tradition. Take note, via oral tradition. So this traditional knowledge or indigenous knowledge po are orally passed from generation to generation. Orally po, oral tradition. Indigenous knowledge or IK is broadly speaking the knowledge used by local people to make living in a particular environment. That is according to Warren 1991. Terms used in the field of sustainable development to designate this concept include indigenous technical knowledge, traditional environmental knowledge, rural knowledge, local knowledge, and farmers or pastoralists knowledge. Okay, so kung titignan ninyo, kung i-observe nyo ng mabuti, i-analyze natin, this kind of knowledge are focusing on the environment or the natural resources that surrounds them. Tingnan nyo po, the concept includes indigenous technical knowledge, the environmental knowledge, the rural, the place they belong, the local knowledge, and the farmers' pastoralists knowledge. So maybe you are wondering, what example of traditional knowledge do we have? Meron ba niyan dito sa ating lugar in Bicol, in Sorsogon? So later on, we will also enumerate some indigenous knowledge and practices that is still observed in our community. Kumbaga doon nag-originate. That's why this is very important, since this is one of the backbone, the foundation of modern science we have today. Okay. Next is a definition from Johnson 1992. A body of knowledge built up by a group of people through generations of living in close contact with nature. Ayan. So generally speaking, such knowledge evolves in the local environment, in their immediate environment, so that it is specifically adapted to the requirements of local people and condition. It is also creative, experimental, constantly incorporating outside influences and inside innovations to meet new conditions. Hindi naman sila totally naka-stick na lang doon. Ano din sila, dynamic din sila to some changes. Pero walang alteration on their environment. Isa yon sa kaibahan niya sa modern science. So later, Warren 1987 defined indigenous knowledge as a local knowledge that is unique to a given culture or society. Okay, unique. According to Rajasekaran 1993, indigenous knowledge is the systematic body of knowledge acquired by local people through the accumulations of experiences. That is an important concept of indigenous knowledge, yung experience, long time experience, okay? Informal experiments and intimate understanding of the environment in a given culture. Sometimes po kasi, actually po, my dear students, there are common misconceptions about indigenous or local or traditional knowledge. Sometimes it is said to be unscientific or opposes the change or development in the modern world. No, hindi po. Misconception lang po natin yan. But because of the modern technology we have, there are human manipulation na nangyayari. And sometimes worse is it destroys the riches of the natural creation. Okay, so let us continue. To Havercourt and the Zoo 1992, indigenous knowledge is the actual knowledge of a given population that reflects the experiences based on traditions and includes more recent experiences with modern technologies. Now, let us compare. Based doon sa mga definitions na binasa natin about indigenous knowledge, let us have now a comparison between indigenous knowledge and modern science. Ang indigenous knowledge ba hindi natin makukonsider na science? Hindi ba yun reliable? Kagaya ng science ngayon na in-explain natin, di ba? We define science as the human attempt to understand the world. How about indigenous knowledge? Di ba it shares the same purpose? It also wants to understand the world in order to survive. Okay? So the close attachment of indigenous knowledge to nature has enabled local cultures to survive for generations amidst pressures of change. The initiatives of the native people to respond to the present condition of the environment provide the dynamic characteristic of the local cultures. So look at that. Meron pa ding dynamic characteristic of the local cultures. May pagbabago. Pero ano yung pagkakaiba niya doon sa science ngayon? tong local cultures. Yung local cultures kasi nag-undergo din siya ng changes. But how is it different from modern science? Yung indigenous knowledge na nandun sa local culture kasi, of course, local culture yon, they are governed or guided by the indigenous knowledge they believe. Okay? So the difference between the local cultures and modern science is that the environment and nature shape the development of the local culture. While, on the other hand, in modern science, change occurs through human intervention and experimentation. Modern science produces man-made technologies that are largely dependent on human action, while indigenous knowledge depends on the natural condition of the environment. Walang nadadivert na condition ng environment as it is. Okay? So yun yung kailangan nating i-take note. Okay, moving on, we have to remember that IKS, the Indigenous Knowledge System, is embedded in the daily life experiences of young children as they grow up. Okay, kaya nga siya orally passed from generation to generation. Hindi na nakasulat siya ngayon, pero since they are preserved, it is already embedded in their daily living, in their, kumbaga, lifestyle. So as young children grow up, they bring up the ideals of indigenous knowledge in their immediate community. So nandito na yung gusto kong i-share sa inyo about some examples of indigenous knowledge. And look at this. Marirealize nyo na, yeah, it is also supported by scientific basis. Pero the indigenous people are, kumbaga, learned this knowledge without using those technologies that we enjoy right now. Examples: predicting weather conditions, a season is using knowledge in observing animal behavior and celestial bodies. So they learn to predict weather condition based on the observation lang po sa animal behavior. And yan, ginagamit yan ngayon sa animal behavior. Okay? Kapag may subject kasi ngayon na animal behavior. And it is proven that there are behaviors of animals that can be a reference or a consideration to predict weather condition. Okay, and also the movement of celestial bodies. Using herbal medicines. Okay, preserving foods. Ginagamit natin yan ngayon. Classifying plants and animals into families and groups based on cultural properties. They learn to do that. Preserving and selecting good seeds for planting. They know how to do it. Using indigenous technology in daily lives. They use technology, of course. Pero what kind of technology? An indigenous technology. Ano yon? Does it pollute our environment compared to the technology we use? Building local irrigation systems. Oh. They know how to do that. Classifying different types of soil for planting based on cultural properties. So in their culture, they have their way to classify the different types of soil and what specific seeds, plants they can plant on the type of soil. Producing wines and juices from tropical fruits. Yeah, they produce wines. What's the process? Ano yung ginagamit nilang process? They also make use of the process of fermentation, but indigenous process, still they do it. Keeping the custom of growing plants and vegetables in the yard. So yun. up to now, di ba? Kahit naman tayo, we are doing it already. Keeping the custom of growing plants and vegetables in the yard, lalo na ngayong pandemic. So, yun ang isang way para hindi ka masyadong na walang ginagawa dahil nga naka-lockdown, ganyan. So, parang bumabalik yung kultura. Okay? So, that is indigenous knowledge po. To correlate in indigenous science. Kasi, yun nga, take note po, indigenous knowledge is reliable. Hindi naman ibig sabihin na indigenous knowledge ay wala namang basihan yan. Okay? For example, meron tayong ganitong ginagawa minsan. If you plant a seedling or a plant, sabi daw, talk to them and relate to them. Kasi pag hindi mo daw kinausap yung plant, they get lonely and they wither. Okay? So, of course, kung about science, parang it's hard to believe, di ba? Na ganun ba yun? May scientific basis ba yun? Is there a profound truth in it para masabi mo we really need to talk to plants? But just the same, learning from indigenous knowledge by investigating our local communities can improve the understanding of agriculture. Okay? Hindi man yun maging totoo, but yung way nila, sabi nga, if we investigate the local communities of what they know and what they have, it can help understand fully the knowledge about agriculture and other sectors like health, food security, okay? Sa medicine, yung mga herbal, diba? Medyo bumabalik na tayo ngayon sa mga alternative medicine because we know that these herbal medicine are really good for us. Okay? And this is more natural resource management. Okay? So, indigenous science is part of indigenous knowledge system practiced by different groups of people and early civilization. So according to Kahete, indigenous science include everything from metaphysics to philosophy and various practical technologies practiced by indigenous people, both past and present. Indigenous science, said by Icarino, elaborated this idea by explaining that science is a part of culture. And how science is done largely depends on the cultural practices of the people. Indigenous beliefs also develop desirable values that are relevant or consistent to scientific attitude. So merong values doon na create sa indigenous knowledge, and this is also consistent or in parallel naman siya to scientific attitude as identified by Johnston. Yan, motivating attitude. Kailangan, if you want to be a scientist, dapat you have this motivating attitude, cooperating attitude, practical attitude, reflective attitude. Okay, so these cultural beliefs therefore can be good foundation for developing positive values toward learning and doing science and in bringing science in a personal level. Okay, so kumbaga may direct kapag you are you understand the concept of indigenous knowledge, meron kang parang personal connection. Okay, and if you try to correlate that in the science we have today, then mas maganda siyang foundation for developing positive values in science education. Also, in addition to that, Pawilen explained that indigenous science knowledge has developed diverse structures and contents through the interplay between the society and the environment. So, indigenous science daw po has developed diverse structures and contents through interplay between science and the society and the environment. Totoo naman yun. Okay? Because we are still dependent on the, 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 the resources we get from our environment. According to Kuhn, developmental stages of most sciences are characterized by continual competition between number of distinct views of nature, each partially derived from and all roughly compatible with the dictates of scientific observation and method. Okay. Moving on, CBC also pointed out that indigenous science provides the basic of astronomy, pharmacology, food technology, metallurgy, which were derived from traditional knowledge and practices. So tignan nyo, yung indigenous science natin ngayon, saan kumbaga, magandang foundation yung nakuha nila from indigenous knowledge. Yung sa astronomy, iba dati wala namang compass, but they kumbaga they predict using the movement of celestial bodies. Ano, madali na bang magmadaling araw? Okay? So, yun, food technology, preserving, 'di ba? Using the process of smoking. What else? Itong we term na buro, binuburo, that is one way of preserving food. Okay? Pharmacology, also that, and metallurgy, those are basic technology na ginagamit nila. And Pawilen developed a simple framework for understanding indigenous science. Accordingly, indigenous science is composed of traditional knowledge that uses science, process skills, and guided by community and values and cultures. So yung indigenous knowledge po nga is composed of science process skills. Like what? Chinamba lang ba ang indigenous knowledge? No, they observe. They also experimented. They analyze. Okay, pero ano yung paano sila nagko-conclude? Paano sila nagko-conclude? Okay, tingnan niyo po. Indigenous science uses science process such as observing, comparing, classifying, measuring, problem solving, inferring, communicating, and predicting. So that is indigenous science. And indigenous science is guided by culture and community values such as the following. Ito di ba gumamit din naman ng science processes, but it is also guided by community values and the culture itself. Like for example, the land is a source of life. It is precious gift from the Creator. Kaya hindi nila hanggat maaari ayaw nilang i-alter eh. Tignan niyo po kung paano nagawa ang Banawe rice terraces. Wala namang ginamit doon na kasi wala pa namang technology noon na kagaya ng technology natin ngayon. Okay? Pero ginamit nila using their bare hands to create that almost perfect, di ba, kind of terraces in the whole world. Isa ang Banawe rice terraces sa napakagandang man-made creation. Pero walang na-alter doon. The land, kasi nga they consider the land as a source of life. Okay, the earth is revered as Mother Earth. Di ba ginagamit natin pa din yan? The Mother Earth. We refer that to our planet. It is the origin of their identity as people. So all living and non-living things are interconnected and interdependent with each other. So ano sila doon? naniniwala sila. Dapat naman talaga nating paniniwalaan that all living and non-living things are interconnected and are interdependent with each other. We cannot live without the non-living things. Without oxygen, we cannot breathe, we die. We cannot survive without interaction with non-living things. Human beings are stewards or trustee of the land and other natural resources. They have a responsibility to preserve it. Ganun nila nakikita yung role nila sa nature. Okay? Kaya yung culture nila, ganun, that they are the stewards or trustee. Unlike sa isa pang paniniwala na parang you are the rightful owner of the land, so I will use it, exploit it because it is created for man. Ika nga, sabi nila. So kaya yan nandiyan yan para yan sa tao. So be it kung maubos. Pero in indigenous knowledge, indigenous people really put an important care, or I mean parang yung napakataas na pag-care, na paggalang in the environment, and they have the responsibility to preserve it. So nature is a friend to human beings. It needs respect and proper care. So next, Indigenous science is composed of traditional knowledge practiced and valued by people and communities such as the ethnobiology, ethnomedicine, indigenous farming methods, and folk astronomy. Okay, so itong indigenous science is composed of traditional knowledge or indigenous knowledge. Na yun yung pinapractice nila ng mga tao in the community. Okay? So, looking at this table, I mean concept map or a diagram, indigenous science uses science process skills, okay, guided by community culture and values, and composed of traditional knowledge. So para mas ma-retain sa isip ninyo what is indigenous science, it uses science process skills. We observe, we conduct comparison, experiment, a simple way of experimentation, and yun nga, still guided by community cultures and belief, and composed of traditional knowledge. So this is the concept of indigenous knowledge. So yan yung pinaka-summary natin ng discussion. We have to put an emphasis kung gaano ka-importante ang indigenous science. Okay, so wait lang. I am going to stop my... Okay, with that brief discussion, you have to remember that like modern science, indigenous knowledge also observe a system of or involves the theory and practice of learning. Indigenous knowledge begins with concept, okay, similar to science, that develops into ideas, philosophies, and principles that are evaluated and verified scientifically. Kasi nga sabi ko sa inyo kanina, there are misconception that says that it is unscientific, but it is wrong. The final form, my dear students, the final form of indigenous knowledge is not simply a product of scientific investigation, but a reality based on the actual experiences of the people. Kaya we can prove na this is also a fact since it is proven based on the actual experience of the people. Okay, so with that, we have to remember that indigenous knowledge is very important as part of our culture. Kasi po, this is an important tool to connect us from the past, from the present, and to the future. Kasi there are studies na nagsasabi that this system and practices are deteriorating. Kumbaga, medyo nawawala na siya sa history or sa kasaysayan natin. So, kailangan po nating ibalik or maipakilala in our students, in our future students, in our families. Kasi kailangan nating magkaroon pa din ng pagpapahalaga. We should show care, environmental care and protection, and cultural preservation. Dapat, kumbaga, ma-instill natin yon sa isip ng bawat kapwa natin Pilipino, because indigenous knowledge and practices are part nga po ng ating pagka-Pilipino. Okay, so that is all for our session today about Indigenous Knowledge System. Thank you so much.